There we go. All right, welcome everybody to the Operation Code and MongoDB Veterans panel. My name is Cynthia Ko. I'm the Executive Director of Operation Code. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a 501c3 national nonprofit with the mission to help our transitioning service members, military veterans, military families enter and grow in our tech careers. And we do this through targeted scholarships, one-to-one mentoring, apprenticeship to hire programs, and free conference, and many more. So today we'll kick off the panel with MongoDB veteran employees, and then we'll have a mentorship match. So if you haven't signed up for the mentorship match, I'm going to go ahead and put the link in our chat. For those of you who have joined us at Operation Code or have not joined us at Operation Code, go to operationcode.org/join. You don't need to be a service member to join us, although to be eligible for our scholarships and some of our other programs, you do need to meet our requirements for being in the military. Let me see, go ahead and fill out this link if you are part of our community and you'd like to be matched up with the MongoDB employee for mentorship. I'm going to go ahead and do an intro to Christy Melissor, the marketing lead for MongoDB, and then we'll kick off the panel. I know Christy is eager to talk about some of the military appreciation programs you have. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Melissor. As mentioned, I work for MongoDB and I lead all of our public sector marketing initiatives. And I'm excited to share with you guys that back in March, we actually kicked off in support of Military Appreciation Month. MongoDB was proud to share an educational program that we offer to help recognize and support those who have or are actively serving today. And to show our appreciation, we want to help all of you become the data experts that you're seeking to become with suggested educational resources that are free and easily available at your fingertips. So whether you're accelerating your move to tech or advancing your current role in technology, or you're just trying to develop in-demand skills no matter where you are in that journey, or you're just looking to gain support from the MongoDB community, this is the perfect program for you guys. And we understand that the first step in doing this is with education. And I understand that, with your time and your schedules, there's, very limited time and availability to do so. These are accelerators. There's not a lot of time that is needed to take or to do these things. And better yet, it's free. And it's available to help military and civilian service members. So to get started, MongoDB does offer 4 different learning paths to help you guys to become an expert in the data space. And once you complete any of those learning paths of your choice, you can complete as many as you want. As I mentioned, there's 4 different dedicated learning paths. But once you complete one, you do receive a 50% off discount code for a MongoDB certification exam. And then you get additional perks for becoming a MongoDB expert, and you get that certification. So we will definitely be sharing some follow-up materials with you guys, so that way you guys can just do this in 2 simple clicks and learn some additional information. But feel free to share my email as a follow-up for any further questions that anyone may have.
Thanks, Christy. When you give me the materials, I can spread that to the community as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
At our next newsletter. Thank you so much. Let's get started with our panelists. Josh, Kurt, Nathan, who wants to kick it off? I'm going to pick on Nathan.
Hi. So my name is Nathan Lenez. I'm a senior engineer at MongoDB and a co-lead for the Veterans Employee Resource Group.
How did you get started at MongoDB?
Oh, specifically at MongoDB, I did the thing that you're not supposed to do and sent my resume in through the automated system, and they actually pinged me back. I initially joined MongoDB in the education organization, so on MongoDB University. They were very impressed with my contribution to open source, my ability to teach myself things, and I had highlighted in my resume, hey, I've been, in the military for, well, at that point, 15 years, senior NCO. It was my job to teach people how to do very technical things. I was Army EOD. So kind of resonated and clicked with them. And that's how I got my start.
Awesome, thanks. Kurt, do you want to go next?
Sure. Unlike Nathan, I did not have the honor of serving, but I did spend 24 years in the federal government. I was an FBI agent for a long time. And during that career, a lot of my coworkers were former military. And I did a lot of training and deployment with the military. I actually deployed to Afghanistan in 2004 with the 10th Mountain Division on a counterterrorism mission. So I'm also the brother of a veteran. So obviously I have tremendous respect and understanding for some of the things that they deal with and went through. And currently I'm the director of physical security here at MongoDB. And I'm an executive sponsor of the employee support group.
Awesome, great to have you.
Thank you.
Josh is an Operation Code member.
I am. My name is Josh Smith. I'm a senior solution architect here with MongoDB. I'm part of our pre-sales organization. So I'm the technical expert that goes along with our account reps to help explain to customers how the product works and all those things. I am an Operation Code member. I just met with the local Kansas City chapter here where I'm located over the weekend. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, so I served from '98 to 2002. And that's kind of my high level background.
Awesome. I've got a funny story to tell, and then we'll kick off a little bit of an icebreaker. So I served 6 years in the United States Air Force Reserves, deployed twice. I was also stationed very close to 10th Mountain down in Syracuse. It was in Alaska, North Dakota, and for some reason, I was always stationed in really cold places, and I don't know if it was because I grew up in Canada, and so wherever I was stationed, they're like, oh, nobody wants to go to cold places. Let's just send KO. What was the most memorable time in service for each of you? Kurt, I know you didn't serve, but I don't know if you had any stories from your brother or during your time when you deployed to Afghanistan as a civilian.
The most memorable time for me in Afghanistan was the first bomb I saw go off. That was, needless to say, that was an eye opener, and that'll wake you up real quick to the reality of what you're dealing with in Afghanistan. So the war was hot back then. It was 2004, and we hadn't been there very long. The Taliban were still putting up a fight. So yeah, it was quite the eye opener, to say the least. Reality check.
Anybody else have a funny story?
You know, I've got a lot of stories, but as I got to thinking about them, I'm not sure any of them were really clean or appropriate to share in a work type setting. That's a little bit of how the military works. I was fortunate to be, I did admin work, right? So I worked in an office, I helped get people promoted and those things. I got pulled into a group that was doing software development, and a couple different times got to go on a working group where the first day was a lot of sitting in a conference room and hearing people talk. And by the end of it, it was about 4 or 5 of us sitting in either a hotel room or a conference room with LAN cables all over the place, feverishly rewriting applications in the middle of the night. Look back at it now, it was a lot more fun than I think I realized at the moment. But
Nathan, what's your most memorable time in the military?
I don't think it'd be appropriate to share some of them, but I can share one from early Afghanistan. I was over there providing EOD support to various units, and the Russians during their Afghanistan withdrawal left a ton of ordnance all over, big bombs, rockets, things like that. So we started collecting them all and called it Valley of Bombs. And we got them all together and did a controlled detonation. The blast wave ended up ricocheting off of the mountains, and the calculations that we had done were wrong. So we were about a click too close to the explosion. Ended up knocking most of us down, get back to the fob, and we got a phone call asking if a nuke had gone off. So it was, I got in
Push-ups for you.
yeah, I got in a little bit of trouble for that one, but it was definitely worth it.
Why math is important, kids. All right, let's head over to the second question. What motivated you all to join the service, and what were some of the responses from your family members and friends? I'll let you know that I did not tell my family. Well, my immediate family knew. My husband knew. My kids were little, so they knew what was going on. In terms of my extended family, nobody knew. I didn't say a word until after it was all done. And I think it was because I got in much later. I didn't start like right after high school, like a lot of people did. I was married to active duty and was an active duty spouse, and always wanted to serve, right? But I never had the opportunity to. So I got in on my 30th birthday, or a little shortly after my 30th birthday. And it was a little bit of a different experience coming in a little bit older than the rest of the folks. But what were some of your experiences?
I can go. I graduated high school. I went to college for a short period of time, and I just didn't have the discipline and the study habits. Right, so I ended up with some financial hardships. Ended up in the Marine Corps from there. So that was really kind of the story of how I got in. My family, I think, was all a little surprised because I'd never mentioned or talked about any interest in that beforehand. And I think it was a little out of the blue, but in the long run, it was by far the best decision, right? It gave me the skills and experiences to get kind of into a better spot. So,
Anybody have any like negative reactions from people?
Yeah. So for me, my motivation for joining was 9/11. I got negative reactions from pretty much all my family. They're very, anti-military. So yeah, it definitely caused a lot of division and distance even to this day.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about transition from your military career to your current civilian career in tech. What were some of the challenges that you can advise for others making that transition, and lessons learned? Let's start with Kurt. I know you weren't in, but just even coming from a government contractor deploying and getting back into like a civilian role where, right now you're considering physical security, that's your job title. Like, how do you leave that behind after you've seen what's happening abroad and served with our military members?
You don't leave it behind ever. It stays with you, and quite honestly, I wouldn't want to leave it behind. Those are valuable experiences. I can't speak for DoD, but I've worked in the government long enough, and the government's pretty much the same attitude towards certain things. The Department of Justice does not do a good job, or any job at all, preparing employees to transition. So I learned the hard way. Luckily, I had friends and I had help, but I reached out to people who had recently transitioned successfully into the working world. And luckily for me too, let me backtrack. I actually came from private industry into the government. I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry before I went to the FBI. So I had some experience of what that was like. So between that prior experience and a lot of help from recent retirees who had done pretty well for themselves, who were willing to reach out and spend the time to explain to me, it's a new world. We don't do things like this anymore. We do things like this. And, the little tips and tricks were very, very helpful. But to find a friend is what I would recommend. And now I do this. I've turned around and I've become that friend for a lot of people. So at least once a week for the last, 6 months, maybe twice a month for the last 6 months or so, I entertain a lot of telephone calls from people looking to transition from the government. Matter of fact, I just had a call Wednesday, right before Thanksgiving, from Tuesday, excuse me, from one of the people I supervised before I left the bureau. He was actually a Green Beret. He did a tour in Afghanistan and I believe Iraq too, but he's looking to transition from the government. We had a long talk about that too. So I've become that person now, but a helping hand is what you need.
Yeah. Josh?
I was pretty fortunate. I didn't spend as long in the service as like, Nathan did, or even with Kurt with the FBI, just did 4 years. But I was really lucky. The systems that I had helped work on when I was on active duty, at the time I was transitioning out, they were getting moved over to a civilian contractor that was located here in Kansas City, where I'm from. So for me, it was a really good opportunity to kind of follow that work over. And I ended up in a role as a DoD contractor where pretty much everybody I worked with was all, Marines as well. So the environment, the atmosphere was very, very similar. The approaches to how they dealt with conflict and a lot of that stuff were toned down a little bit from maybe how the military does it, but a lot of similarities there. And I think that made it easier to make that transition, because it wasn't, it just was a different environment, right? When everybody's former military, the interactions are a little different. So it felt a little more comfortable. But for me, that was great, because I was able to get a couple years of good corporate experience in my resume and those things. And that was kind of the leapfrog to then move on to different places and stuff from there. So I got really lucky with timing and in a couple different areas that I was just really fortunate. So
yeah, I learned the lesson hard that you're not an island. You're not meant to be an island. I think when I first got out, I'm like, I don't really need anybody. I'm just going to do this alone. Figure it out the hard way, and made a lot of mistakes, probably made a lot of failures that I could have avoided had I had, the support system. I think most of the folks I served with were still in. So when I got out, it was still like a lot of the folks I knew that were civilians were older vets, and they were in law enforcement, like firefighters, cops, and I'm like, but I don't want to do that. And I want to get into law enforcement. I knew I was already going to be in tech. And it's a completely different kind of culture, right? Like, and I did the same thing as you, Josh. I spent a few years in government contracting, defense contracting, in the tech space, and then moved into private sector. And that did help with that the cultural transition as well. But I think when I made the leap, I wasn't sure, do I do startup? Do I do major corporation? Like, I really had no compass. And I think like Operation Code serves to be that community for people where we're not going to tell you what job title you should go for, or tech is so big, but we help people to find their own kind of compass, their own journey, which is more unique to your skill sets. Let's go with the next question. What are some implicit biases that you may have noticed towards vets in the tech industry? How can we start to tackle those? Let's start with Nathan.
Yeah, so I think the only bias or the one that stands out to me, I had a new manager come in, and she during our first meeting, our intro meeting, she said, well, you can't treat people like privates. And it caught me by surprise, because I've never treated anyone at MongoDB like a private. I think anyone who's been a private understands the difference. But there's not a lot of bias that I see, unless it's like very blatant over bias. And it caught me by surprise, and there's really no defense to it. It was really, really jarring.
Yeah, how do you respond to that? Like, are people aware that they're making statements that are probably not the best statements to make, or do you think that it's just a lack of education?
I didn't know how to respond to that. I reached out to friends. I reached out to a friend in HR. What do I say? I don't even know where to go from here in this. So that one I just kind of took on the chin, and didn't really respond, because there's no defense to that. You can't, well, I don't do that. This was their within their first 2 or 3 weeks on the job. And how do you, it was really just kind of like caught me by complete surprise.
Yeah. Josh, do you have anything to add?
no, I think I've seen similar things to Nathan's, right? It's not typically really overt and maybe not to the level of, kind of explicitness that Nathan shared, but I do think you see some of that. I have to think it comes from, the one veteran they may have worked with in the past who did do that, right? Who took the really bad form of military leadership and then tried to apply it in the private sector world. And that can kind of stereotype a huge group. And that's just not really, I think, how it works. I think if anything, that's more on those of us that are already in those corporate jobs to help make sure and set the example. That's not how this works, right?
Mhm.
I don't do that. I've had a few conversations with Nathan through our employee group. He doesn't do that. There's a lot of veterans at MongoDB that would never behave that way. But I think it's on us as we're out in the corporate world to make sure that that's the example we're seeing. And I think sometimes we don't do a good job of letting people know that we're veterans. So people get surprised by it. And maybe that's an area where we can be more explicit about, hey, we model good leadership in those things, and it's because we're veterans, not in spite of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that like a lot of the conversations we're having at Operation Code is surrounding how do you disclose, not just on your resume, but how do you disclose your veteran status? Because there could be biases. For example, we had one of the members I was mentoring recently, gave me his resume. I was doing a referral for him, and I noticed he took his Marine Corps status off completely, like just didn't even put it on his resume. And he doesn't have a lot of civilian experience. I said, do you want to put your military experience on here? He goes, well, what I did for the Marine Corps has nothing to do with tech. And I've gotten, like, in interviews, I've had some biases with people saying, why did you serve in the Marines? And are you violent? And a lot of these things where you could see the stereotypes kind of getting embedded, right, with the hiring process. And he found that it was more harmful to him than helpful. So he left it off. And that's the last thing we want, is for our members to feel like, hey, I can't even talk about my military service because whoever's going to screen it, like, they're not even going to look at me just because it's on there. And that, not only the military service, but how do you translate your military MOS, your occupational specialty, to a civilian, translating it. Like, a lot of people are told, hey, if you're at the squad leader above, just put program manager. That may or may not be true. And so then that ends up hurting people when they go, well, you really weren't a program manager. Like, did you do, AKIs, or like, did you do any other project planning? Did you beat metrics for the quarter? And so that may or may not have happened in the military. But there's definitely a need for some folks to get some, really deep mentorship to be able to say, what are your skill sets? What did you actually do in the military? How can we best translate that? And then on the other side, what we're doing at Operation Code is training the hiring managers, right, with cultural competency, and then trying to break down some of those implicit bias, because nobody wants to say, yeah, I don't like veterans. But I've been in interviews where people will say, like, we don't want to hire another vet because the last person we hired had some issues. And then so they make a blanket statement towards everybody. Thanks, Ed, for your comment. Anybody else with questions, feel free to post it and then we'll address it after. Let's go on to this next question. Let's start with Josh. Who are the people that helped you get to where you are today? And what did they do differently? How did they support you?
I've had a couple different cases where, I've been fortunate to have some good mentors. Right? Obviously, when I first left the service and started working as a contractor, had a number of people there that were experienced in that role. So there was one of the actual managers was a retired lieutenant colonel. He was really good about helping kind of bridge some of those communication gaps and skills that I just didn't necessarily have in terms of working in a corporate environment. But so that was really helpful for me. The biggest one, there's a CIO at a company here in Kansas City that I worked at a few years ago. He's a former Army intelligence, and he was really kind of influential, both just in really just a number of areas, like helping me understand, how to look for leadership roles, how to kind of transition my thought process from just being in a contributor role to trying to move up into leadership positions, expanding my offerings, but also just understanding how to relate back to the military stuff at times, right? Corporate's big on like emotional intelligence and those things. And that's extremely important. I don't want to downplay it, but there is a little bit of sometimes when the military approach can be nice of like, hey, just find a way to get the job done. So he was, because he had experience on both sides, was really helpful for me in terms of being able to help me navigate through some of those frustrating experiences and stuff like that, and make sure I was making progress and not letting stuff get in my way.
Yeah, Nathan?
Yeah, so my military career was very Bob Ross in a way, a lot of happy accidents. And EOD was it is small units and interfacing with different types of units all the time. So I had to learn to be a chameleon and just kind of get along with different personality types and different mission sets and whatnot. And when I transitioned straight from retirement to MongoDB. A little bit jarring. I can get into that later in some respects, but I really have to give credit to my first manager who gave me space and time, and did regular check-ins. Hey, how are you feeling? Things like that. There's a lot of different things I was experiencing. And then, I found some technical mentors within the company who really helped me out and helped me kind of up my game on the technical side. And, from there, it was just kind of being like water, and allowing, basically accepting that the old way of life is over. Here's a new way. How do I fit into this? Asking, friends and family, their thoughts and opinions.
I think staying humble is a really big thing,
Yeah.
For me, like being an individual contributor was a little bit different than when I moved into being a founder. Definitely realize that, hey, the whole military chain of command thing does not there is a somewhat of a chain of command in the civilian world, but you can't just expect people to respect you because of a rank like that's not, or a title, right? It doesn't exist anymore. And a lot of the other veteran founders that had been around the block, that had been acquired and run several startups, were instrumental in helping me with that cultural transition and being like a really good leader. What does a good leader look like? And it begins with, like, you have to serve first, and you've got to bring out the best in other people, right? It's not about you. It's not about your title. It's not about you running the whole shebang. And so it was like a complete 180 in my understanding. Let's go on to Kurt. Are there any challenges you face now that you've made it? Do you feel like you've made it in a tech role?
There's a little bit of imposter syndrome, just a little bit. But that's honestly been the only real challenge I've had here, besides the adaptation to the culture. That's been the only significant challenge I've had. I treated my transition into MongoDB a little bit like when I was in the FBI, I became pretty good at reaching out to other agencies, companies, groups to work together on individual issues, governments, whatever have you. So I would work with a lot of foreign governments. I would work with a lot of corporations on criminal investigations and things like that. So I was actually kind of used to reaching across the aisle, shaking hands, finding common ground, and working on problems together. So it really wasn't that bad. Has not been that bad. It also helps, of course, as I heard mentioned before, if you have good leadership. I was brought in by Lena Smart, our CISO, who has been unbelievably supportive, provides amazing guidance and advice, and doesn't get in my way. Just kind of clears a path for me to do what it is that I need to do.
Mm-hmm. How about Nathan? Do you feel like you ever said to yourself, "Okay, I've made it. I'm good"?
No, never like I've made it. Imposter syndrome is definitely real. When I was in education and then I was lead on docs, it was more comfortable, for sure, but it really wasn't, kind of my end state where I wanted to be. Now as a senior engineer, every day, I deal with imposter syndrome. I'm working with people who have a formal education, who went to great schools, and trying to sponge up as much as I can. You know, it's I kind of liken it to you know, Sisyphus, but I am making progress pushing the boulder up the mountain. And it's all in my head. But personally, no, I don't think I'll ever be in a state where I say, yep, I've made it, I'm good.
Josh, what about you?
I mean, especially in the tech industry, like the saying is software is never done, right? It's just waiting for the next feature or piece to come along. So I don't mean I've had some good success in my career, but I don't feel like I've really made it, right? Because there's always something more to learn and something bigger to try to go figure out and do. And so for me, I think that's the key, is just try to realize that there's always somebody smarter and better and faster, and there's always something for me to try to get better at.
Yeah, for sure. I think tech, you know, a lot of our new members that are transitioning who haven't yet started in their first tech role, they have this mentality of like, if only I can just get my first software development job or my first tech role, I'll be good and I've made it. And the truth is, once you start, it's really just the beginning of your journey, because like, you know, agile software development, you're constantly iterating, not only personally on yourself, but also in your career, where what you want to do. I've seen people grow, you know, by leaps and bounds, where they started off as a developer and then they're like, you know what, I love that and that was great, but I love sales engineering, or they've completely shifted to where they now want to work in startup, or they want to work more on the marketing and comm side for tech, which is really completely different than what they used to be. So I think that it's not stagnant. You're just constantly growing. You're constantly learning about yourself. All right, a few more questions. What are your top 2 pieces of advice for other vets that may be struggling right now? Whether it's finding meaningful work, you know, finding their identity, post-uniform, trying to figure out their next steps. And we've seen a lot of shifts in dynamic in the tech industry in the last couple of years. And there are a lot of folks that are struggling right now. What's your key piece of advice to keep going?
So I could start. I think Kurt and Nathan both said it, like, imposter syndrome is a real thing. I've had in the past roles where I was the hiring manager for those things, and I would see people, if I had 10 qualifications I wanted, that would have 1 or 2 or 3, and would submit a resume without even batting an eye, right? They were happy to go through that stuff. And then I would see others, and I've talked to some of the people through the Operation Code stuff, where they would have 5 or 6 or 7 of the qualifications, but they weren't sure it was enough, and they would second guess whether they should apply on that stuff. My advice would be don't, right? The people you're competing against, if they can get 3 or 4 out of 10 and maybe a decent story for number 5, they're taking a shot at it. You should be doing the same thing. So second guessing yourself and thinking you've got to have this like perfect set of criteria before you can even apply, you're eliminating a huge chunk of opportunities that you're probably a really good fit for, just because you're doubting yourself. So for me, I think that would be the biggest one. And then the other is, and I think Kurt said it really well, like, find a mentor, right? Find somebody else in tech or otherwise that you can bounce ideas off of, or those things, because they'll give you a whole lot of help and assistance, and leverage your network, right? There's a lot of veterans out there who are happy to help one another out. Don't hesitate to get plugged into that and see where they can help you.
Awesome stuff. I love that advice. Don't self-select out. I say that a lot. Let somebody else disqualify you, but don't disqualify yourself.
I just wanted to bookend what Josh was saying too, as far as at least for me, part of the hard part about the transition is when you did something that you were passionate about, that you knew was impactful to people's lives, you almost feel like, how am I going to top this, right? Mm-hmm. Where am I going to get job satisfaction after this? And the 2 pieces of advice I would give people transitioning is, 1, how do I put this? Do not settle, right? Find out what it is that you don't want to do. Have that conversation with yourself, and then find out what it is that you are interested in doing. And once you've answered those questions, don't settle for anything in between. I had a handful of job offers prior to MongoDB, and I turned them down. And I'm glad I turned them down, because this is actually where I should be. You know, I fit here. The team, the leadership, everything works. There are other jobs, and I won't mention where I knew in retrospect, if I'd worked there, there's no, I don't feel like I'm contributing anything to the program. So again, don't settle, figure out what it is that you don't want to do first, and then what you do want to do, and focus on that and go forward.
Great advice. Nathan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, my two. So the first one is always be hungry. And in the same vein, embrace setbacks, right? So if you are trying for a technical role, embrace it when the program crashes, embrace it when things don't work. I firmly believe that most veterans have suffered more than our non-veteran counterparts, yet we continue going. The rock gets heavy, well, you keep walking. Doesn't matter, you just have to get to the end. You will grow a lot more from embracing things like that, and then trying for the next thing, try things harder. And that also puts you kind of ahead of your competition, because, well, now you're working on, you're kind of, showcasing your skills. And then the second one, and you said it, a couple people have said it, don't be afraid of rejection. I saved some gems of getting rejected resumes, if you don't ask the question, it's a guaranteed no. So let someone tell you no. Don't do the dirty work for somebody else.
Something I want to touch on, and Kurt mentioned it, is finding the right place for you. I think while you're sorting out who you are after your military identity, because when you're wearing that uniform for years, like, there's a sense of you that gets lost, right? Like your own voice, your own personality, what likes and dislikes you have, what you're allowed to pursue. And I've noticed this in interviews when veterans say, well, we worked on this, like, as a team, because you're not allowed to stand out in the military. You don't say I. And it's really hard, because in the civilian world, they're like, well, what did you contribute to? What project did you work on, right? And in software, you're never really by yourself, like coding away and working on this feature by yourself. But I think in the interview process, people are trying to see, what do you have that stands out from other people? And you have to sell yourself a bit. That's a really uncomfortable hat to wear for most veterans, I find. The other thing is, I spent a lot of years working in environments that were clearly not right for me. They were not supportive of me when I was a reservist. They were not supportive when I had to deploy. They weren't supportive of my family that now had to deal with a deployed family member. They would block me from moving up, like, because they were, oh, well, you could deploy at any time. We don't want to promote a reserve or National Guard. And so there's that alternative question of, like, in my mind, my family members, like, I come from a generation of immigrants. So they were like, just be quiet, don't make noise, don't stand up for yourself, just tolerate it. And that whole mentality, because they're like, you don't want to lose your job, you don't want to get fired. So I put up with a lot of toxicity, and I put up working in environments where I should have started questioning, like, what does this company stand for? Are they really going to support me? And so one of the things I love to tell people is, when you're being interviewed, it is also an interview process for the hiring manager, for that company. It's okay to start asking questions like hypotheticals. In the case that you are a reservist or National Guard, how would they handle it? And there are folks that are like, I'm also afraid to disclose I'm a reservist, because then they might discriminate against me. But that tells you something. If they're going to discriminate against you, and they're not going to answer your questions honestly and truthfully, they're not going to be upfront about that support in the interview process, then you kind of have an idea of how they're going to treat you once you get in there. And I think that's super important to kind of find out, is this the right fit? Are they supportive of you being hired for a career, not just being hired for a role? Let's go on to this question. How can we support veteran spouses and family members? I don't think we talk about that enough. I started off as a military spouse first before I became a service member. My oldest son is a service disabled veteran. He got out of the Army as a combat veteran as lockdown hit with COVID, and he was really struggling, not just with transition, but he was going through transition under lockdown, which was even harder. So what are some things we can do to support our military spouses and family members? Nathan?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is empathy and keeping their perspective in mind. I'll share a personal story. My first wife and I spent so much time deploying and TDY. We ended up growing apart, and we amicably split. But I never really considered what it was that she was also sacrificing when I was away. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a complete lack of control. Your husband, your wife, your family member, they're told to be somewhere, at what time, what uniform, and there's nothing you can do about it. So keeping that in mind, being supportive of them, and understanding, that, hey, they may be going through these things, and no one wants to feel powerless. So try and help them feel empowered in some ways. Don't respect what they're going through, but don't treat them like a chipped teacup. Give them choice, give them agency. I think that goes a long way to help them.
Awesome, thank you. Are there some meaningful things tech employers can do to open the doors for our military community and increase employee retention or hiring of veterans? Josh, you have any ideas? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, so recently at Mongo, we completed a recruiting training package that specifically is tailored towards how to interpret a veteran's resume. And I think a lot of companies could do something similar, where a recruiter is going to look at a resume and they're going to spend 30 seconds to a minute looking at it, and then they're either going to put it in a pile for future consideration, or they're going to put it in a pile and you may or may not get a rejection letter sometime down the road. I think companies investing some time in training for recruiters and hiring managers would go a long way, because I can tell you, most of the advice you get from the transition center and whatnot is completely wrong about how to format your resume. It's going to be way too long. They're never going to read through it. So, I think that would be probably first and foremost a good way to help.
Josh?
Yeah, I think Nathan hit it on the head, right? Like, I've been in those hiring manager roles before, and I know from having been in the military how to interpret some of the pieces that veterans would put on the resume, especially people that were just trying to get in, and they hadn't had corporate jobs before, so they don't really know how to format it. And it's hard. Like, it's a hard translation to go from how to translate military experience into corporate. But I think that's something that teams and organizations can definitely help do and train on. I've never, in the other places I've been in hiring manager roles, I've never had any training on that. I've never talked or had organizations that talked about it. So it's really cool that we do that. I wasn't aware. I'm not in a hiring role right now, but that's it's really, I think it speaks a lot to how we work as a company. But I think that's a big piece of it. I think the other one is just awareness, right? Like, there's a ton of companies out there that have these open roles and things like that maybe this veterans just aren't finding because they don't know to look, or those companies aren't putting job postings in the right places, or there's a lot of recruiting and staffing companies get involved in tech, and maybe they're kind of involved in the stuff there. So I think that's another piece, is just expanding where they're kind of posting job openings to, making sure they're explicitly going out and acknowledging for veterans that, hey, we want you, we want to bring your skills in and that stuff. I think that'd be the other one.
Yeah, I find some of the apprenticeship, the paid apprenticeship to hire programs are super helpful. They're specifically for military or military spouses. And then it gives people like a cushion, right? Where they have like 6 months to a year to really grow in their role and then, get to know the culture of the company can get to know them. Those have been some great ways for people to land some of their first tech roles. All right, last question for everyone on the panel. What's one takeaway you want to tell civilians who may not understand the veteran experience? I think mine, I'll start first, is that not all veterans are cookie cutter. It's not one size fits all. A lot of people look at me until I tell them, they're like, oh, you don't look like a veteran. And my answer is always like, what does a veteran look like? Because I don't fit that stereotypical like infantry look, right? So we come from different backgrounds. We have different jobs in the military. We have all different branches. We come from different parts of the country. We speak different languages. That's my input. Kurt.
So I would say, like anything else, talk to one of us first. At least with the case of the FBI, most people at least know somebody who's in the military, but most people have never knowingly met an FBI agent, right? So all you have are TV and the movies, and people assume that that's what you are. When I first came in, I think everybody thought, if anybody's ever seen that movie, Men in Black, where Tommy Lee Jones says, "No, man, we here at the FBI don't have a sense of humor that we're aware of." I definitely ran into that a little bit, where people thought I'd be a humorless jerk. But again, don't stereotype. Don't go with what you heard or what your friends told you, what somebody saw on social media. Actually have a conversation and get to learn. There's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Kurt said, right? I've had a lot of conversations with people and gotten to know them fairly well before I ever figured out that they were a fellow veteran, because in many cases, the military is far more diverse than other areas can be, right? And so you run into a lot of different people with different ethnicities and backgrounds and educations, and it would be really good for that. But yeah, people make a lot of bad assumptions, right? They assume we all, run around in the desert with knives, fighting wars all the time, and that's not what a lot of us did. But again, have a conversation. We can surprise you. So,
Nathan, let's end with you.
Echoing what Kurt and Josh said, and you, I love talking to people and them not realizing we're a vet until later, and I had no idea. Oh, well, thanks. It's I kind of like that. And if they do know you're a vet, talk to them. Hey, I've always thought that if I had to make someone stand at a certain position or call me, by my rank and last name, then I'm not being an effective leader. So it's just have real, genuine conversations.
Awesome. Let's open up for Q&A. If there are any, open floor for those of you listening, watching. Feel free to post your questions for any of the panelists or just for MongoDB in general. I don't see any questions so far. I'm going to repost the mentorship sign up if you joined in a little bit late. If you haven't requested a mentor, I just put the form in the chat. For those of you who would like to join Operation Code, go to operationcode.org/join. Feel free to join our community. I like to say we're stronger together, right? We have all different kinds of folks within the community that works in almost every single type of tech role you can think of, and non-dev roles as well. So love the community. I love that we're community propelled and we're constantly kind of forging forward together. So I want to thank all the folks from MongoDB who joined, Grace Lim for helping put this together, who's on the call, Christy, who had to hop off on our military appreciation certification program, which I'll send back out to everybody who's interested, Nathan, Kurt, and Josh for being panelists today. Thanks all for attending and have a great Cyber Monday the rest of your week.